The wagon wheels creaked against the rocky ground as they rolled into Cedar Ridge on a dusty afternoon in 1847. Katie O'Brien sat in the back of the covered wagon, her green eyes taking in the small mining town that would become her new home. At 19, she had already seen more hardship than most people twice her age. The long journey from Ireland to America, then across the dangerous frontier, had tested her family's strength in ways she never imagined. Her father, Patrick, guided the tired horses down the main street while her mother, Bridget, clutched her rosary beads. They had come to Colorado Territory with dreams of gold and a better life, just like hundreds of other families flooding into these wild lands every month. But Katie carried something more valuable than dreams of gold in her worn leather satchel, knowledge passed down through generations of Irish women. Her grandmother, rest her soul, had taught Katie everything about herbs and healing. Which leaves could stop bleeding, which roots could break a fever, which flowers could ease a woman's pain during childbirth. In the old country, people called her grandmother a wise woman. Here in America, Katie hoped to use that same knowledge to help people and maybe earn some honest money for her struggling family. Cedar Ridge was bigger than Katie expected. The main street bustled with miners, merchants, and families. Wooden buildings lined both sides of the dusty road, a general store, a saloon, a boarding house, and even a small church with a crooked steeple. The air smelled of horses, wood smoke, and something else Katie couldn't quite place. Hope, maybe, or desperation. The O'Brien family rented a small cabin on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms with thin walls and a leaky roof, but it was theirs. Patrick found work at the biggest mine in the area, owned by a wealthy man named Jeremiah Stone. Katie's mother took in washing and mending, and Katie, well, she started doing what came naturally to her. Word spread quickly in a small town. When Mrs. Henderson's baby came down with a terrible cough that kept the whole family awake at night, someone mentioned the Irish girl who knew about healing herbs. Katie knocked on their door the next morning with a small bundle of dried leaves. "Steep these in hot water," she told Mrs. Henderson in her soft Irish accent. "Give the baby just a spoonful every few hours. The cough should ease by tomorrow." It worked. Within 2 days, little Tommy Henderson was sleeping peacefully through the night. Mrs. Henderson told her sister, who told the baker's wife, who told 3 other women at the general store. Soon, Katie had a steady stream of visitors to the O'Brien cabin. She never asked for much payment. Sometimes people brought her a few coins, sometimes a basket of vegetables or a jar of preserves. Katie was just happy to help. In Ireland, her grandmother had always said that healing was a gift from God, meant to be shared with those who needed it most. For 6 months, everything seemed perfect. Katie helped deliver 2 healthy babies, cured a dozen cases of fever, and even saved old Mr. Crawford's leg when it got infected after a mining accident. The town doctor, an elderly man who smelled like whiskey more often than not, actually started sending people to Katie when his own treatments failed. People began calling her the Irish healer, or sometimes just the herb girl. Children would wave when she walked down Main Street to buy supplies. Women would stop her to ask about remedies for their husbands' aching backs or their own monthly troubles. Katie felt useful, needed, and happier than she had been since leaving Ireland. But happiness in the frontier was always fragile, and Katie's world was about to shatter in the worst possible way. It started when Thomas Stone, the mine owner's only son, came down with a fever in late autumn. Thomas was 22 years old, handsome and spoiled rotten by his wealthy father. He had never worked a day in the mines like other young men his age. Instead, he spent his time gambling, drinking, and chasing after pretty girls in town. When Thomas got sick, his fever climbed higher and higher. His father, Jeremiah Stone, called for the town doctor first, but the old man's treatments didn't help. Desperate, Jeremiah swallowed his pride and asked Katie to come see his son. Katie arrived at the Stone Mansion, the biggest house in Cedar Ridge, carrying her leather satchel of herbs and remedies. Thomas was burning up with fever, sweating, through his expensive sheets, mumbling words that made no sense. His skin felt like fire under Katie's gentle touch. She had seen this kind of fever before. It was dangerous but not impossible to cure if treated properly. Katie prepared her strongest fever-breaking tea, the same recipe her grandmother had used to save countless lives in Ireland. She cooled Thomas with damp cloths, made him drink small sips of her herbal medicine, and stayed by his bedside for 3 days straight. For a while, it seemed like her treatment was working. Thomas's fever broke on the second day, and he seemed to be getting better. His father even smiled at Katie and promised to pay her well for saving his boy's life. But on the fourth day, something went terribly wrong. Thomas took a turn for the worse. His fever came back stronger than before, and this time Katie's remedies couldn't touch it. She tried everything she knew, different herbs, cold baths, even prayer. Nothing worked. Thomas Stone died on a gray October morning, with his father holding his hand and Katie standing helplessly at the foot of the bed. Jeremiah Stone's grief turned to rage faster than lightning strikes. He stared at his dead son, then turned those cold eyes on Katie. "You did this," he whispered, his voice shaking with fury. "You killed my boy with your devil's potions." Katie's heart raced. "Sir, I tried everything I could. Sometimes the fever is just too strong. Even doctors lose patience when—" "Doctors," Stone roared. "You're no doctor. You're just some Irish girl playing with weeds and thinking you know better than trained men. My son was getting better until you poisoned him with your witch's brew." The accusation hit Katie like a physical blow. In Ireland, she had heard whispers about wise women being called witches by those who feared what they didn't understand. But she never thought it would happen to her, especially not here in America where she had helped so many people. Word of Thomas Stone's death spread through Cedar Ridge faster than wildfire. By evening, the story had changed and grown in the eye-telling. People said Katie had cursed the boy because his father was rich. Others claimed they had seen her dancing naked under the full moon, casting spells. Some even whispered that she had made a deal with the devil himself. It didn't matter that Katie had saved dozens of lives over the past 6 months. Fear was stronger than gratitude, and Jeremiah Stone had money and influence. When he started talking about witchcraft and devil worship, people listened. When he suggested that Katie was dangerous and needed to be stopped, men started gathering in the saloon to discuss what should be done. Katie's parents tried to convince her to leave town immediately. "We can pack tonight," her father urged. "Be gone before sunrise. Find another town where nobody knows what happened here." But Katie was young and stubborn and believed in justice. She had done nothing wrong. She had tried her best to save Thomas Stone's life, just like she had tried to save everyone else who came to her for help. Running away would make her look guilty of something she didn't do. "I won't run," she told her parents. "Let them investigate. Let them ask questions. Everyone in town knows I've helped them. They won't turn against me over one man's grief and anger." Katie was wrong. Fear makes people do terrible things, and Jeremiah Stone was very good at feeding that fear. He offered a reward for any information about Katie's witchcraft. He reminded people of old superstitions from their home countries, stories about women who consorted with dark forces. He painted Katie not as a healer, but as a threat to every decent family in Cedar Ridge. 3 days after Thomas Stone's funeral, they came for her. Katie was gathering herbs in the field behind her family's cabin when she heard the sound of horses and angry voices. She looked up to see 20 men riding toward her, led by Jeremiah Stone himself. Their faces were hard and determined, like men who had already made up their minds about what they were going to do. "There she is," Stone shouted, pointing at Katie. "There's the witch who murdered my son." Katie dropped her herb basket and ran toward the cabin, but the men on horses were faster. They surrounded her before she could reach the door, where her parents stood watching in horror. Strong hands grabbed her arms and dragged her toward the center of town, even as she protested her innocence. A crowd had already gathered in the town square. Men, women, and children, many of them people Katie had helped and healed, now stared at her with suspicious, fearful eyes. Someone had built a fire in the middle of the square, and the flames danced high into the darkening sky. "This woman stands accused of witchcraft and murder," Jeremiah Stone announced to the crowd. His voice carried across the square, silencing the murmurs and whispers. "She used dark magic to kill my innocent son, and God knows how many others. She might have cursed with her evil spells. "That's not true," Katie cried out, struggling against the men who held her arms. "I tried to save your son. I've helped half the people in this town. Ask Mrs. Henderson about her baby. Ask Mr. Crawford about his leg. Katie found an abandoned trapper's cabin 3 miles outside Cedar Ridge, hidden in a grove of pine trees near a clear mountain stream. The roof leaked, the door hung crooked on its hinges, and mice had made nests in the corners, but it was shelter. More importantly, it was far enough from town that the good people of Cedar Ridge could pretend she didn't exist. The first winter nearly killed her. With no family to help and no money to buy supplies, Katie survived on whatever she could find, or catch. She set snares for rabbits, gathered pine nuts and wild berries, and used her knowledge of plants to find edible roots under the snow. Some nights, huddled by a meager fire in the drafty cabin, she wondered if she should have left with her parents after all. But every morning she looked at her reflection in the stream and saw the scar on her shoulder. The word witch had healed into raised, angry letters that would never fade. That scar reminded her why she stayed. She refused to let them win. She refused to disappear. Spring brought unexpected visitors to her door. The first was Maria Gonzalez, a Mexican woman whose husband worked in the mines. Maria came at night, her face hidden by a dark shawl, carrying her sick baby wrapped in a thin blanket. "Please," Maria whispered in broken English, glancing nervously toward town. "My little one, she burns with fever. The doctor, he says nothing can be done. But I remember you helped Mrs. Henderson's baby before what happened." Katie looked at the feverish child in Maria's arms. The baby's skin was hot and dry, her breathing shallow and rapid. It was the same kind of fever that had killed Thomas Stone, but Katie knew more about treating it now. She had spent the long winter months thinking about that case, wondering what she could have done differently. "Bring her inside," Katie said softly. "Let me see what I can do." Katie prepared a gentle fever-reducing tea using willow bark and elderflower, plants she had gathered and dried during the autumn. She showed Maria how to give the baby tiny sips of the medicine and how to cool her with damp cloths without shocking her system. Most importantly, she watched the child carefully for any sign that the fever was becoming the deadly kind that had claimed Thomas Stone. For 3 days, Maria stayed in the cabin while Katie fought to save her daughter. The fever broke on the 3rd morning, and the baby opened her bright brown eyes and smiled. Maria cried with relief and pressed a small bag of coins into Katie's hands, payment her family could barely afford, but given with deep gratitude. "You are no witch," Maria said firmly as she prepared to leave with her healthy baby. "You are an angel sent by God to help people like us." Maria was the first, but she wasn't the last. Word spread quietly through the community of Mexican workers and their families, people who lived on the edges of society, who couldn't afford the town doctor or didn't trust him to care about their lives. They came to Katie's cabin after dark, carrying their sick children and elderly parents, hoping the Irish woman with the terrible scar could help them. Katie never turned anyone away. She treated infected wounds, delivered babies, cured fevers, and eased the pain of the dying. Her reputation grew slowly and carefully among people who understood what it meant to be outcasts. They called her La Curandera, the healer, and they kept her secret from the townspeople who had branded her. As months passed, other visitors found their way to Katie's door. There was Running Wolf, an elderly Cheyenne medicine man whose own people had been driven from their traditional lands. He came not seeking treatment, but offering to trade knowledge. The old man taught Katie about local plants she had never seen in Ireland, sage that could purify the spirit, echinacea that boosted the body's natural defenses, and dozens of other remedies used by his people for generations. In return, Katie shared her grandmother's recipes and techniques. She showed Running Wolf how to make poultices that drew infection from wounds and teas that could calm troubled minds. They spent hours together by her fire, 2 healers from different worlds finding common ground in their desire to help others. "Your scar," Running Wolf said one evening, studying the burned letters on Katie's shoulder. "It tells the story of your people's fear, but scars can be marks of survival, not just wounds. Your spirit is stronger because of what you endured." His words helped Katie see her scar differently. Instead of hiding it under high collars and shawls, she began to accept it as part of who she had become. The people who came to her cabin didn't care about the mark on her shoulder. They cared about her skill, her compassion, and her willingness to help when no one else would. Summer brought new challenges and new allies. A group of freed slaves heading west to California stopped near Katie's cabin when one of their number collapsed from exhaustion and illness. Their leader, a strong woman named Ruth, approached Katie cautiously. "We heard there's a healer in these parts," Ruth said, her hand resting protectively on a walking stick. "But we also heard she's been marked as dangerous. We don't want trouble, but our friend is dying." Katie looked at the sick man lying in their wagon, his breathing labored and his skin gray with fever. "Bring him inside," she said without hesitation. "I don't care what you've heard about me. If I can help him, I will." The man had developed pneumonia from weeks of difficult travel and poor conditions. Katie worked for days to clear his lungs and break his fever, using steam treatments with medicinal herbs and carefully monitored doses of her strongest remedies. Ruth and her companions watched in amazement as their friend slowly recovered. "You saved his life," Ruth said, when the man was finally well enough to travel. "But more than that, you treated him like he was worth saving. Not everyone would do that for people like us." Ruth's group stayed an extra week, helping Katie repair her cabin and teaching her skills they had learned during their journey west. In return, Katie taught them basic healing techniques they could use during their continued travels. When they finally left, they promised to spread word about the healer near Cedar Ridge to other travelers who might need help. By autumn, Katie's cabin had become a hidden sanctuary for anyone society had cast aside. She treated injured railroad workers, sick prostitutes from the saloons, Native Americans displaced from their lands, and immigrant families too poor for proper medical care. Her patients paid her in whatever they could afford, sometimes money, sometimes food, sometimes just their gratitude and promises to help others in need. Meanwhile, life in Cedar Ridge continued as if Katie didn't exist. Jeremiah Stone had gotten his way. The Irish witch had been marked and driven out, and the town could pretend it was safe from evil influences. But pretending didn't make it true. Strange things began happening in town that autumn. The new doctor they had hired to replace Katie's services proved to be incompetent and drunk more often than sober. Several children died from fevers that Katie could have cured easily. Women began dying in childbirth at alarming rates. Injuries that should have healed became infected and claimed limbs or lives. Some people started whispering that maybe they had been wrong about Katie. Maybe driving out the Irish healer had been a mistake. But Jeremiah Stone's influence was still strong, and admitting error would mean admitting they had tortured an innocent woman. It was easier to blame bad luck or God's will than to face the truth about what they had done. Katie heard about the town's troubles through her network of patients and allies. Part of her felt vindicated. They were suffering the consequences of their own fear and ignorance. But a larger part of her felt sad for the innocent people who were dying, because skilled healing was no longer available in Cedar Ridge. One snowy evening in December, Katie's philosophy was tested in the hardest way possible. A young man appeared at her door, half frozen and desperate. He was clearly from town. His clothes were too fine for a laborer, and his soft hands had never held mining tools. "Please," he gasped, falling to his knees in her doorway. "My wife is dying. The baby is coming wrong, and she's bleeding. The doctor is too drunk to help, and nobody else knows what to do. They said you might." Katie looked at him carefully. She recognized him now. David Patterson, son of the baker, who had stood in the crowd when she was branded. His wife was the daughter of one of the men who had held her down while they burned her flesh. Every rational part of Katie's mind told her to turn him away. These people had tortured her and driven her from town. They had made it clear that they considered her evil and dangerous. Why should she risk her life to help them now? But as she looked at the desperate young man shivering in her doorway, she thought about Running Wolf's words about scars and survival. She thought about her grandmother's teachings about healing being a gift from God. Most of all, she thought about the oath she had made to herself when she first started helping people, to never let someone suffer if she had the power to help them. "Get your horse," she told David Patterson. "Take me to your wife." The ride back to Cedar Ridge was the longest of Katie's life. Every step brought her closer to the place where she had been branded and humiliated. The scar on her shoulder burned with phantom pain as they approached the town limits. She pulled her hood up to hide her face, though she doubted anyone would recognize the ragged woman she had become. Spring arrived early in 1851, bringing with it changes that would transform Katie's quiet life forever. She was gathering wild herbs near the stream behind her cabin when she heard the distant sound of gunfire echoing across the valley. Living on the frontier had taught her to recognize the difference between hunting shots and trouble. This was definitely trouble. The gunfire came in rapid bursts, suggesting a running battle between multiple groups. Katie quickly gathered her herb basket and headed back to her cabin. If people were going to be wounded, they might need her help, and she wanted to be prepared with supplies and medicine ready. She didn't have to wait long. Just after sunset, 3 men on horseback came thundering up the path to her cabin. Katie recognized 2 of them as deputy marshals who had passed through the area before, but the third man was a stranger. Even in the dim light, she could see he was badly wounded, slumped forward in his saddle and barely staying conscious. "Ma'am," called out the lead deputy, a grizzled man named Johnson. "We heard there's a healer in these parts. Our friend here took a bullet in the shoulder and another in the leg. He's lost a lot of blood." Katie stepped into the lamplight so they could see her clearly. "Bring him inside. I'll do what I can." The wounded man was unlike anyone Katie had ever seen. He was tall and powerfully built, with bronze skin that spoke of mixed heritage, part white, part Native American. His long black hair was tied back with a leather cord, and even unconscious, his face showed the kind of strength that came from surviving hard battles. Blood had soaked through his buckskin shirt and leather pants, and his breathing was shallow and labored. "What happened?" Katie asked as the deputies helped carry him into her cabin. "Name's Bear Robinson," Deputy Johnson explained, gently laying the wounded man on Katie's bed. "Best tracker and scout west of the Mississippi. We've been chasing a gang of outlaws for 3 weeks, and they finally decided to make a stand in Devil's Canyon. Bear here took 2 bullets, saving my life when they got the drop on us." Katie immediately began cutting away Bear's blood-soaked clothing to assess his wounds. The bullet in his shoulder had gone clean through, which was good news. The one in his leg was still lodged in the muscle, which meant she would have to dig it out. Both wounds were bleeding heavily and showed signs of infection starting to set in. "You men will have to leave," she told the deputies firmly. "This is going to take all night, and I need quiet to work. Come back in the morning." "Ma'am, we can't. Just leave him here with—" Deputy Johnson started to say, then stopped when he noticed the scar on Katie's shoulder. His eyes widened as he recognized the burned letters. "You're the one they call the witch." Katie met his gaze steadily. "I'm the one they branded, yes. I'm also the one who can save your friend's life. Your choice. Trust me to help him, or watch him die while you debate my reputation." The deputies exchanged uncertain glances. Bear Robinson groaned and stirred slightly, his fever climbing as infection spread through his system. Finally, Deputy Johnson nodded reluctantly. "We'll camp nearby," he said. "If you can save him, ma'am, we'd be mighty grateful. Bear's a good man, and he doesn't deserve to die because of our prejudices." After the men left, Katie worked through the night by lamplight. She cleaned Bear's wounds thoroughly, removed the bullet from his leg with steady hands, and applied her strongest healing salves. His fever was high and dangerous, so she prepared cooling baths and fever-reducing teas, forcing the medicine between his lips while he drifted in and out of consciousness. Bear was delirious for most of the night, mumbling in what sounded like Cherokee mixed with English. He spoke about someone named Singing Bird, about battles and losses, about feeling caught between 2 worlds that both rejected him. In his fevered state, he seemed to be reliving painful memories from his past. Katie found herself drawn to this mysterious man as she tended his wounds. There was something in his face, even unconscious and racked with fever, that spoke of deep understanding and hard-won wisdom. When she gently bathed his forehead with cool water, he seemed to calm under her touch, as if some part of him recognized that he was safe. Dawn was breaking when Bear's fever finally began to subside. Katie had dozed fitfully in her chair beside the bed, waking every few minutes to check on her patient. She was changing the bandages on his shoulder when his eyes suddenly opened, clear and alert for the first time since his arrival. Bear studied Katie's face for a long moment, taking in her tangled red hair, tired green eyes, and the determined set of her jaw. His gaze flickered briefly to the scar on her shoulder before returning to meet her eyes directly. "You saved my life," he said simply, his voice rough from fever and pain. "You're not out of danger yet," Katie replied, though she felt relief at seeing him conscious and coherent. "The wounds are clean, but you lost a lot of blood. You'll need to rest for several days before you can even think about traveling." Bear tried to sit up and immediately grimaced as pain shot through his injured leg. "My men, the deputies, are they safe?" "They're fine, camped just down the hill, waiting to hear if you'll live or die." Katie gently pushed him back down onto the pillows. "And you will live if you follow my instructions and don't try to be a hero." Something that might have been a smile flickered across Bear's weathered face. "Yes, ma'am. Though I have to say, you're not what I expected when they said there was a healer out here. What did you expect? Someone older, maybe with warts and a crooked nose." His eyes grew serious. "Not someone who looks like she's barely past 20 and has scars that tell their own story of surviving other people's ignorance." Katie felt her cheeks flush. It had been a long time since any man had looked at her with anything other than fear or suspicion. "How do you know about ignorance and scars?" Bear gestured to his own face, where Katie could now see old marks she had missed in the lamplight. Thin scars along his jaw and temple, evidence of past violence. "My mother was Cherokee. My father was a white trapper. I've spent my whole life being too Indian for white society and too white for my mother's people. I know what it's like to be marked as different." Over the next few days, as Bear slowly recovered, Katie learned more about the man who had stumbled into her life. He had been born in the Cherokee Nation, but raised in white settlements after his mother died when he was 12. He spoke fluent Cherokee, English, and Spanish, making him valuable as a scout and translator for military units and law enforcement. Bear had served as a medic during the Mexican-American War, where he learned basic field surgery and wound treatment. He understood herbs and healing in ways that most white men didn't, knowledge inherited from his Cherokee mother, and expanded through necessity during his military service. "Your techniques," he told Katie on his third day of recovery, watching her prepare a poultice for his leg wound. "They're better than most army doctors I've seen. Where did you learn?" Katie found herself telling Bear her story, about her grandmother in Ireland, about coming to Cedar Ridge with such hope, about Thomas Stone's death, and the terrible night when the townspeople branded her. She had never told the complete story to anyone before, but something about Bear's quiet attention made the words flow freely. When she finished, Bear was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out and gently touched the scar on her shoulder, tracing the burned letters with one finger. Katie tensed, expecting disgust or pity, but his touch was gentle and understanding. "They tried to mark you as something evil," he said, quietly. "But all I see is someone who chose to stay and help people even after they hurt you. That takes more courage than anything I've done in my battles." Katie felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever called her courageous before. Stubborn, yes. Foolish, certainly. But never brave. "I don't feel brave. Most days I feel angry and alone." "Brave people usually do," Bear replied. "It's the ones who feel invincible that you have to worry about." As Bear's strength returned, so did his curiosity about Katie's work. He asked detailed questions about her herbal remedies, compared her techniques to Cherokee healing practices, and even helped her gather plants when he was strong enough to walk. Katie found herself looking forward to their conversations in ways that both thrilled and frightened her. Bear was unlike any man she had ever known. He listened when she spoke, asked thoughtful questions about her experiences, and treated her knowledge with genuine respect. He didn't try to take over or tell her better ways to do things. Instead, he seemed fascinated by her skills and eager to learn from her. On Bear's 5th day at the cabin, the deputies returned to check on his progress. They were amazed to find him sitting up, alert, and clearly on the mend. Deputy Johnson pulled Katie aside while Bear was getting dressed. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology," Johnson said, removing his hat and looking genuinely ashamed. When I realized who you were, I had doubts about leaving Bear in your care. I've heard the stories about what happened in town, and I'm ashamed to say I half believed them." "And now?" Katie asked. "Now I can see that whoever hurt you was the real criminal. You saved Bear's life with skill that puts most trained doctors to shame. If anyone ever speaks ill of you in my presence, they'll answer to me personally." Summer brought changes to Katie's hidden valley that she had never dared to imagine. Bear kept his word about staying, sending word to his deputy friends that he was retiring from active tracking to help establish a proper medical clinic in the area. The deputies were skeptical at first, but when they saw how much happier and more settled Bear seemed, they gave him their blessing. Together, Katie and Bear began transforming her small cabin into something larger and more functional. Bear proved to be skilled with his hands, and he designed a clever expansion that would give them a proper treatment room, a medicine preparation area, and living quarters that didn't double as a makeshift hospital. Working side by side every day, Katie learned more about the man who had chosen to share her life. Bear had a gentle way with frightened patients that complemented her medical skills perfectly. He could calm a crying child with a soft Cherokee lullaby, or distract someone from pain by telling fascinating stories about his travels across the frontier. But it was during the quiet evening hours that Katie truly fell in love with Bear Robinson. He would sit by their fire, carving wooden tools for her medical practice or repairing equipment that had broken during the day. Sometimes he would share stories about his childhood with his Cherokee mother, teaching Katie words in his native language and explaining the spiritual beliefs that guided his approach to healing. "My mother used to say that all healing comes from connection," Bear told her one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Connection to the earth, to the plants that grow in it, to the people we're trying to help, and to each other." She said healers who worked alone were only half as effective as those who had partners to share the load. Katie smiled, leaning against Bear's shoulder as they sat on the porch he had built for their expanded cabin. "Your mother sounds like she was very wise." "She was. I wish you could have met her." Bear's arm tightened around Katie's waist. "She would have loved you, would have seen in you the same strength and determination that kept our people alive through so many hardships." These conversations helped Katie understand why Bear had chosen to stay with her. Like her, he had spent most of his life caught between worlds, never fully accepted by either his white father's people or his Cherokee mother's tribe. In each other, they had found someone who understood what it meant to be marked as different, to survive rejection and build strength from survival. The scar on Katie's shoulder no longer felt like a burden when Bear was around. He had a way of touching it that transformed the burned letters from a mark of shame into simply part of her story. Sometimes when they were alone in the evening, he would trace the letters with his finger while telling her how beautiful and strong she was. "These marks don't make you less," he would whisper against her hair. "They make you more. They show everyone that you survived something terrible and chose to keep helping people anyway. That's not a witch's mark. That's a warrior's mark." Their relationship deepened as the months passed, but it wasn't just romance that bound them together. They worked as a team in ways that amazed everyone who came to their clinic. Bear's knowledge of Cherokee healing practices combined with Katie's Irish herbal wisdom created treatments that were more effective than either tradition alone. When a mining accident brought them 5 men with severe burns, Bear and Katie worked for 18 straight hours to save their lives. Bear prepared cooling poultices using Cherokee techniques while Katie brewed powerful pain-relieving teas from her grandmother's recipes. All 5 men survived, though they would carry scars for the rest of their lives. "We're good at this," Katie said as they finally collapsed into bed after the crisis, exhausted but satisfied with their work. "We're better together than either of us could be alone," Bear agreed, pulling her close. "Just like your grandmother's healing combined with Cherokee medicine, some things are stronger when they come together." Word of their clinic's effectiveness began to spread beyond the immediate area. People traveled from towns 50 miles away to seek treatment from the Irish healer and her Cherokee partner. They brought cases that local doctors had given up on: children with mysterious fevers, women with difficult pregnancies, men with injuries that wouldn't heal properly. Katie and Bear saved most of them. Their reputation grew not just for medical skill, but for treating everyone equally regardless of race, social status, or ability to pay. Their clinic became known as a place where outcasts and forgotten people could find healing and dignity. But their success didn't go unnoticed by everyone. Jeremiah Stone, the mine owner who had orchestrated Katie's branding 3 years earlier, watched their growing influence with increasing anger and concern. Stone had built his power in Cedar Ridge on fear and control, and the success of the clinic represented a direct challenge to his authority. Stone had his own reasons for hating Bear Robinson, beyond just his association with Katie. Bear's mixed heritage and his reputation for standing up to injustice made him a threat to Stone's operations. Some of Stone's mine workers had begun asking uncomfortable questions about their working conditions and pay after seeing how well Bear and Katie treated their patients. The situation came to a head in late August when one of Stone's most valuable miners, a man named Carlos Hernandez, was severely injured in a cave-in that Stone's negligence had caused. Instead of sending Carlos to the expensive doctor in town, Carlos's wife brought him to Katie and Bear's clinic. Carlos had suffered crushing injuries to his chest and internal bleeding that would have killed him without immediate treatment. Katie and Bear worked together to stabilize him, using techniques that the town doctor wouldn't have known or attempted. After 3 days of intensive care, Carlos was going to survive, though he would never be able to do heavy mining work again. When night reached, Jeremiah Stone learned where Carlos had been treated. He flew into a rage. Not only had his worker survived to potentially testify about the unsafe conditions that caused the accident, but Stone's authority had been undermined by people seeking help from the witch he had tried to destroy. Stone began spreading new rumors about Katie and Bear. He claimed they were using dark magic in their treatments, corrupting good Christian folk with heathen Cherokee rituals. He suggested that Bear was probably part of the outlaw gang he had originally been tracking, hiding out at the clinic to avoid justice. The rumors found fertile ground among people who were already suspicious of the clinic's success and the mixed-race couple running it. Some of the townspeople who had previously supported Katie began to waver in their loyalty, remembering the fear and superstition that had led to her branding in the first place. Katie sensed the changing mood when fewer patients began arriving at the clinic, and those who did come seemed nervous and apologetic. She mentioned her concerns to Bear, who had noticed the same troubling signs. "Stone's up to something," Bear said grimly as they discussed the situation one evening. "I've been asking around town, and his people have been spreading stories about us. Nothing direct enough to confront, but steady whispers designed to undermine people's trust." "What kind of stories?" Katie asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. The usual nonsense about witchcraft and devil worship, but also new lies about me being an outlaw, about us poisoning people instead of healing them, about the clinic being a front for criminal activity. Bear's jaw tightened with anger. "Stone's setting the stage for something, Katie. We need to be prepared." Katie felt the old fear creeping back into her heart. The terror she had thought was buried forever. "Maybe we should leave," she said quietly. "Pack up and start over somewhere else where Stone's influence can't reach us." Bear took her hands in his, looking into her eyes with fierce determination. "We're not running, Katie. What we've built here matters too much. The people who depend on us matter too much. Besides," he smiled grimly, "I'm tired of letting men like Stone drive good people away from their homes. But Bear, you don't understand what he's capable of. You didn't see the hatred in their eyes when they held me down and burned these letters into my skin. If Stone turns the whole town against us again, then we'll face it together," Bear said firmly. "But this time you're not alone. This time you have someone who will stand beside you and fight back if necessary." Katie wanted to believe him, but she had learned the hard way that mobs didn't listen to reason. Still, the thought of abandoning the clinic they had built together of letting Stone drive them away from the work they loved, was almost unbearable. Their conversation was interrupted by a frantic knocking at their door. Bear grabbed his rifle while Katie gathered her medical supplies, both of them expecting either patients in need or trouble from Stone's people. Instead, they found Maria Gonzalez, the Mexican woman whose baby had been Katie's first patient in the hidden cabin. Maria's face was streaked with tears, and she clutched a crumpled piece of paper in her shaking hands. "Please," Maria gasped, "you must help us. They're coming for my husband tomorrow night. Someone told Stone that Carlos was talking about the mine accident, about the unsafe conditions. Stone's people left this note saying Carlos will have an accident if he doesn't keep his mouth shut." Carlos Hernandez arrived at the clinic just after midnight, supported by his brother and still weak from his injuries. The note threatening his life had shaken him badly, but his anger burned even brighter than his fear. "I won't be silent anymore," Carlos told Katie and Bear as they helped him into the clinic. "For years, Stone has endangered workers with unsafe conditions. Men have died because he won't spend money on proper support beams or safety equipment. Someone needs to speak the truth about what's happening in those mines." Bear studied the threatening note again, his tracker's instincts analyzing every detail. "This paper is expensive, good quality, and the handwriting is educated. Probably Stone himself wrote this, not one of his hired men. That means he's confident enough to threaten you directly," Katie added. "He doesn't think anyone will challenge him or that the law will intervene." "The law won't intervene," Carlos said bitterly. "Stone owns the sheriff and half the town council. The federal marshals only come through here every few months, and Stone always knows when they're coming." Bear was quiet for a long moment, studying the note and thinking hard. Finally, he looked up with a determined expression. "What if we brought the marshals here ourselves? I still have contacts from my tracking days. Good men who care more about justice than politics." "But how would we prove anything?" Katie asked. "It's Carlos's word against Stone's, and Stone has money and influence." "Not just Carlos," Bear said slowly. "I've been talking to people around town, remember? Other miners, storekeepers, even some of Stone's own employees. Everyone's afraid to speak out individually, but if they knew they had protection..." Katie began to understand what Bear was suggesting. "You want to organize the people Stone has been bullying, get them to testify together about his crimes." "Exactly. Stone's power comes from fear and isolation. He keeps people afraid to speak out by making them think they're alone. But if enough people stand up at the same time, with federal protection..." Carlos's eyes lit up with hope for the first time since arriving at the clinic. "My cousin works in Stone's office. She's seen the books, knows about the bribes and the unsafe conditions, and there are at least a dozen other miners who've been hurt because of his negligence." "It's dangerous," Katie warned. "If Stone finds out what we're planning before the marshals arrive, he'll try to silence everyone permanently." Bear reached over and took her hand. "Everything worthwhile is dangerous, Katie, but we can't keep letting him hurt innocent people just because we're afraid of what he might do to us." Katie looked at the faces around her. Carlos, injured but determined to seek justice. Bear, ready to risk everything to do what was right. Even Carlos's brother nodding in agreement despite the obvious danger. She thought about all the people who had come to their clinic seeking healing, many of them victims of Stone's greed and cruelty in one way or another. "All right," she said finally. "Let's do it. Let's bring Stone down." The next few days were a whirlwind of careful planning and secret meetings. Bear reached out to his old contacts among the federal marshals, while Katie and Carlos quietly approached people who had been hurt by Stone's operations. They had to be incredibly careful. Stone had spies throughout the community, and one wrong word could doom their entire plan. To their surprise, once people learned they weren't alone in their anger toward Stone, many were eager to speak out. The Mexican and Native American workers had no legal protection under Stone's corrupt local system, but federal law was different. Women whose husbands had died in preventable mine accidents wanted justice. Storekeepers who had been forced to pay Stone's protection fees were ready to testify about extortion. Bear's reputation as an honest tracker opened doors that might have remained closed to others. People trusted him because they knew he had risked his life for justice before. They also trusted Katie because she had spent years healing people without regard for their ability to pay or their social status. But Stone wasn't sitting idle during their preparations. His spies reported increased activity around the clinic, and he began to suspect that something was being planned against him. Rather than wait to find out what it was, Stone decided to strike first. The attack came on a warm September evening, just as Katie and Bear were finishing dinner. They heard horses approaching fast and looked out to see a group of armed men surrounding their clinic. Stone himself sat on a large black horse at the front of the group, his face twisted with rage and determination. "Katie O'Brien," Stone shouted. "Bear Robinson, you're harboring a fugitive and spreading lies about respectable citizens. Come out and face justice." Bear grabbed his rifle and positioned himself at the window. "There's at least 15 of them," he told Katie quietly. Too many for a direct fight. Katie's heart was racing, but she forced herself to think clearly. They had prepared for this possibility, knowing that Stone might try to stop them before the marshals arrived. "The signal," she whispered. "Light the signal fire." Bear nodded and quickly lit the special fire they had prepared on their roof, a signal that would be visible for miles and alert their allies that trouble had arrived. Within minutes, answering fires began appearing on distant hills as their network of supporters received the warning. "You have 1 minute to come out," Stone yelled. "After that, we're coming in to get you." "We're not coming out, Stone," Bear called back. "And you're not coming in. This property is under federal protection." It was a bluff. The marshals wouldn't arrive for at least another day, but Stone didn't know that. His men shifted nervously in their saddles, unsure whether they wanted to fight federal agents. "Federal protection?" Stone laughed, but Katie could hear uncertainty in his voice. "There are no federals here, half-breed. Just you and that witch hiding like cowards." "Then why don't you come in and find out?" Bear challenged. Before Stone could respond, new voices began calling out from the darkness around the clinic. Katie's heart soared as she recognized the sounds of their allies arriving. Miners, storekeepers, families they had helped over the years. Within minutes, Stone's group found themselves surrounded by an even larger crowd of angry townspeople. "Jeremiah Stone," called out a strong female voice. Katie recognized Ruth, the freed slave who had become a leader in the community of travelers and outcasts. "You want to fight someone? Fight all of us." More voices joined in, people who had come from miles around in response to the signal fires. They had planned for this moment, knowing that Stone would eventually try to silence them with violence. Instead of hiding in fear, they had chosen to stand together. Carlos Hernandez appeared at the edge of the crowd, still weak but determined to face his tormentor. "I'm not hiding anymore, Stone, and neither are any of us." Stone's confidence began to crumble as he realized he was outnumbered and surrounded. His men were clearly uncomfortable with the situation, especially as women and children joined the crowd. These weren't outlaws or troublemakers. These were their neighbors, people they had grown up with. "This is illegal assembly," Stone tried, to regain control. "Disperse immediately or face the consequences." "The only illegal thing here is your threat to murder Carlos Hernandez," Bear called out, holding up the threatening note. "We have written proof of your crimes, Stone. And tomorrow, when the federal marshals arrive, everyone here is going to testify about what you've done to this community." The mention of federal marshals caused a stir among Stone's men. Several of them began backing their horses away from the clinic, clearly having second thoughts about their involvement. Stone realized his support was crumbling and made a desperate decision. "If I can't have this town," he snarled, "then nobody can." He pulled out his pistol and aimed it directly at Katie, who was visible in the clinic window. Bear reacted instantly, throwing himself in front of Katie just as Stone fired. The bullet caught Bear in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the floor. Katie screamed and dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against the bleeding wound. The crowd erupted in anger at seeing their protector shot down. Stone's remaining men found themselves facing dozens of furious people who were no longer afraid of the mine owner's threats. Several of Stone's supporters threw down their weapons and rode away, wanting no part of what was about to happen. You shot an unarmed man, Ruth shouted. You tried to murder a woman. Everyone see what kind of man Jeremiah Stone really is? Stone found himself alone except for 3 of his most loyal enforcers. Surrounded by an angry crowd and facing certain justice when the marshals arrived, he made one final desperate attempt to salvage his position. She's a witch, he screamed, pointing at Katie as she tended Bear's wound. She's corrupted all of you with her devil magic. Can't you see what she's done to this town? But his words fell on deaf ears. The people surrounding the clinic had seen Katie heal their children, save their lives, and help their families. They had seen her branded and driven out, only to return and show mercy to the very people who had wronged her. If that was witchcraft, then it was a kind of magic they wanted in their community. The only evil here is you, Stone, called out David Patterson. The Bakers,